Have you ever loved something so deeply that it changed the way you see life itself? This is the story of my cat. More than a pet, more than a companion, she became my teacher, my healer, and my mirror to the soul. Stick with me through this journey, because by the end, you'll see why a single cat can hold the power to transform an entire human life. And if you believe that stories like these deserve to be heard, make sure you subscribe right now so you never miss another one. My story begins on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the air feels neither exciting nor disappointing, just still. I had been walking home, weighed down not by groceries or heavy bags but by something much heavier: silence. My life at that time felt like a loop. Wake up, drag myself to work, come back to an empty apartment, sit in front of a glowing screen until my eyes blurred, then fall asleep only to repeat the cycle the next day. Friends had slowly drifted away into their own families, marriages, and distant cities. My parents, though alive and loving, lived too far away to fill the quietness of my evenings. I often told myself I was fine, but anyone watching me closely would have seen the hollowness that lived in my small apartment along with me. It was during one of those evenings, as the sun was dropping its last bits of golden light onto the pavement, that I heard the faintest cry, fragile, trembling, yet persistent. At first, I thought it was some child's toy squeaking, but when I leaned down toward the shadow under the broken fence near the alley, two eyes blinked back at me. A tiny kitten, barely more than a handful of fur, shivered in the cold. Her coat was a patchwork of white and gray, with a streak of black running down her nose as if painted there by accident. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Something about the way her fragile body trembled stirred something inside me, a part of me I hadn't felt in years, the urge to protect. At that moment, without thinking of consequences, I stretched my hand toward her. She hissed weakly, though her sound carried no real threat. Carefully, I scooped her up, pressing her small heartbeat against my chest. That was the beginning of everything. The first few days were not easy. My apartment wasn't prepared for a cat. I didn't have food bowls, litter boxes, or even cat food. I poured some milk into a saucer, only to realize later that cats aren't supposed to drink milk as it upsets their stomach. But the kitten lapped it up greedily, her tiny tongue darting like lightning. I found myself running to the nearest store, buying cans of food, a small litter tray, and even a toy mouse. My budget didn't exactly allow for these sudden expenses, but something about her eyes convinced me that this was necessary, not optional. I named her Luna. Luna was different from any pet I had ever seen. At first, she was quiet and cautious, exploring corners of the apartment like a small detective. She often disappeared under the bed or behind the sofa, only peeking out when the room was silent. But slowly, she began to open up. The first time she purred while sitting on my lap, I felt an odd warmth that no human presence had ever given me. Her tiny body vibrated with trust, and it was in that moment I realized she had chosen me. I wasn't her rescuer, I was her family. Days turned into weeks, and my life began to change in subtle ways. No longer did I rush home simply to collapse in front of a screen. Instead, I hurried back to see her waiting by the door, her tail flicking like a pendulum of joy. Her meows became conversations. I talked to her about my day, about my frustrations, about my dreams, and though she never replied in human words, her presence was enough. Somehow, she listened better than most people ever did. My loneliness began to dissolve. One evening, after a particularly hard day at work, I returned home defeated. My boss had criticized me harshly, a project I worked weeks on had been dismissed as unimpressive, and I felt worthless. I sat on the floor, head in my hands, ready to cry. That was when Luna climbed onto my lap, pressing her forehead against mine. It wasn't dramatic, no fireworks, no grand gestures. But her simple, instinctive action was more powerful than anything. She reminded me I mattered. To her, I wasn't a failure. I was her world. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Luna grew quickly, and with her growth came personality. She was mischievous, knocking over cups, chasing shadows on the wall, and occasionally deciding that 3 a.m. was the perfect time to sprint across the apartment like a tiny thunderstorm. Yet, even in her chaos, she carried a strange wisdom. When I sat in silence, deep in thought, she would curl beside me. When I was anxious, she would rest her paw gently on my arm. It was as if she could feel my emotions and respond in the only way she knew, by being there. The more time I spent with her, the more I began to see life differently. Her world was simple. She didn't care about promotions, bank accounts, or what society thought of me. She cared about warmth, safety, and love. Watching her chase a sunbeam across the carpet made me realize how much beauty I had been ignoring in the little things. I had been so focused on surviving life that I had forgotten to live it. Luna was teaching me how. One unforgettable moment happened about a year after I found her. I had been invited to a family reunion out of town. It was the first time I had to leave Luna behind for a couple of days. I asked a neighbor to check in on her, but the entire trip, I couldn't stop worrying. When I returned and unlocked the door, Luna darted straight into my arms. She cried loudly, circling me as if scolding me for leaving. That overwhelming reunion made me realize how deeply we had bonded. She wasn't just a pet anymore, she was home. Time, however, has a way of testing everything. A few years later, Luna fell ill. She stopped eating, grew lethargic, and her once bright eyes dimmed. Panic seized me as I rushed her to the vet. Sitting in the clinic, I felt my hands tremble the same way hers once had when I first found her. The vet ran tests, and for hours, I lived in fear of losing her. Finally, the doctor told me it was an infection, serious but treatable. I burst into tears of relief. For weeks, I nursed her back to health, feeding her medicine, holding her close, whispering promises that I wouldn't let her go. Slowly, she regained her strength. It was in that fragile time that I realized how much she had become a part of me. Losing her would have meant losing a part of my soul. Years passed. My career shifted, my friendships changed, and life threw its usual storms. But through it all, Luna remained constant. She aged gracefully, her fur softening into silver streaks, her movements slower yet still filled with grace. I watched her grow old, and in her aging, I saw my own reflection, the inevitability of time, the fragility of life. Yet, she never seemed afraid. She continued to find joy in the smallest things. A warm blanket, a gentle scratch behind the ears, the sound of my voice. She taught me that love is not about how long it lasts but about how deeply it is felt in every moment. The story of my cat is not one of just companionship. It is one of transformation. Luna taught me patience, presence, and the value of unconditional love. She turned my empty apartment into a home, my loneliness into laughter, my sadness into peace. Even now, when I look at her curled up beside me, breathing softly in her sleep, I know she saved me as much as I saved her. This story is still being written. Luna is still with me, her eyes still carrying the wisdom of 1,000 quiet nights. She may not live forever, but her impact already will. Because of her, I learned to open my heart, to slow down, and to embrace life's fleeting, beautiful moments. And I believe that if one small, abandoned kitten could change my world, then maybe love, in its simplest form, is the most powerful force we have. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit like, drop a comment about your own furry friend, and most importantly, subscribe right now. Because every story we share here is more than just words, it's a reminder that love, kindness, and connection can change lives. And trust me, the next story might be the one that changes yours.